Andy here. Today I'm going to be taking a quick look at the Lenovo ThinkPad E490s. This is a new addition to the ThinkPad lineup, bringing the S suffix to the budget E series for the very first time. Let's see how it fits into the ThinkPad lineup and if it may fit into your tech toolkit. The build quality is one of the most immediately noticeable characteristics of the E490s. This is the rare ThinkPad, which has a fully metal exterior, which gives it a premium feel. The smooth, dark gray finish is very reminiscent of the mid-range Lenovo consumer laptops like the Yoga 7 series, though that's not a bad thing. The E490s doesn't feel quite as rigid as more expensive ThinkPads, but it's far from flimsy. At its $600-ish price point, the build quality is hard to argue with. The one issue I'd expect is that this finish is going to scratch. I didn't experience it in my time with the E490s, but my old Yoga 730 did have a similar finish, and it picked up scratches pretty easily. Though if you did baby it, it was quite possible to avoid that. As for the weight of the E490s, it's certainly on the heavier end of the modern Ultrabook, but at 3.8 pounds, I think it's just light enough to not feel like a burden when you're carrying it in a bag, like a backpack or a messenger bag. Though, if you plan on using this like one-handed, where you're actually holding it like out in the field and using it, it might get a little heavy in that situation. So the screen on the E490s is, I guess I would say it's fine. This unit has a 280 nit, theoretically, matte IPS screen. I didn't test that, I don't have any gear to test that, but we'll take them at their word, 280 nits. When I was using this for email or simple web browsing, it wasn't really bad at all. In fact, I didn't really notice it. It looked perfectly fine. But when I was watching high quality video content like Netflix or Disney Plus, the lack of brightness and color saturation was definitely noticeable. I do always appreciate a display that has a matte finish, because I do have an X1 Carbon 7 that has a glossy finish, and when there's a window behind me, the E490s was almost preferable due to the matte finish, even though that one has the 500 nit HDR display. So the matte finish goes a long way in terms of making an otherwise meh screen pretty darn useful. Unlike the Yoga series that I compared this to earlier, the screen does not rotate all the way around, though it does pull the classic ThinkPad trick of opening to 180 degrees, which can occasionally be useful in tight quarters. Port selection is one area where the E490s delivers a clear win. On the left side, we have a non-Thunderbolt USB-C port, which is where the E490s conveniently also charges. That's accompanied by a full-size HDMI port, 2 USB Type-A ports, and a headphone jack. On the right side, we have Ethernet, another Type-A USB port, and a micro SD card reader. As someone who works in IT, I particularly appreciate the Ethernet port, which is getting harder and harder to find, especially on Ultrabooks, but also who can't argue with a total of 4 USB ports, if you count that USB-C port that does get used for charging. Throw in dedicated display, Ethernet, and a card reader, and it's a pretty sweet lineup of ports. I do usually prefer the full-size SD card reader when it's an option, but that's getting rarer and rarer these days, so I've actually switched over to using micro SD cards and SD card adapters. That way, if I'm using a laptop that has a micro SD card reader, I can still just plug the card right in. Input on the E490s is a bit of a mixed bag. The keyboard is very typical of a ThinkPad, so it's a really good keyboard, but it does feel a little bit softer than the more premium models like an X1 Carbon or a T series, so just a little easier, less force to get the keys down, but still a really good keyboard. And it does offer 2 stages of backlighting as well, so that's always nice, the backlit keyboard, which you don't always get when you're paying $600 to $700 for a laptop. The trackpad, on the other hand, is mediocre at best by modern standards. There's nothing particularly deal-breaking about this trackpad, but it has kind of a rough, cheap-feeling texture, and it doesn't feel quite as precise as other trackpads I've used in this price range, like the Yoga 730, that is another Lenovo laptop. So it is a reliable trackpad, though, and this is a ThinkPad, so you do always have the track point, which is faithfully represented on this model. I didn't particularly test performance, but the E490s handled light multitasking just as I would expect of a laptop with a modern Ultrabook CPU. This unit has the i7-8565U CPU, which is a 4-core, 8-thread Ultrabook processor, and it should be great for office work and even capable of handling some less demanding or more demanding projects. I've done a little bit of video editing on similar projects or processors, and well, it can get a little hairy, especially when you get a bunch of clips in there and you're trying to actually do effects. It's definitely possible if you're patient. This unit shipped with 8 GB of RAM, but it has 2 dedicated RAM slots, so you can upgrade this baby all the way to 32 GB, which is pretty cool. It does have 1 slot for an M.2 NVMe SSD. This one came with a 256 GB model. Obviously, you have lots of options for upgrading the SSD, either with Lenovo or on your own. All in all, the E490s fills an interesting spot in the ThinkPad lineup. An affordable, attractive ThinkPad with a near full selection of ports and fully upgradable RAM, weighing in at under 4 pounds. The metal exterior is dreamy, though I'm pretty sure it will pick up scratches without pretty committed babying. If you're looking for a $700 Ultrabook with plenty of ports, you could do a lot worse than the ThinkPad E490s. I don't currently have the E490s anymore, it's been deployed, but feel free to ask any questions you may have anyway, and I or maybe someone else will have an answer. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.